This is Wireless Banter Show, Season 1, Episode 1.5. Anyway, today's topic is what Wi-Fi folks need to know about CBRS. We'll be interviewing the president of CBRS Alliance, Dave Wright. In this episode, you'll learn the basics of CBRS and where the technology is headed. Hope you enjoy. Also, go to our website wirelessbs.com to register for Season 1, Episode 2, our next week episode, where Joel looks at mixing enterprise security and encryption methods. And we also talk about the iPhone 11 impact on enterprise wireless. Again, that's wirelessbs.com. Now, on with the show. Hope you like it. Should we start with a quick intro, Dave? If you can, just as long or short as you want.
Great. Well, thanks, Jussi. Thanks, Jerry. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. So I am Dave Wright, and my day job is Director of Regulatory Affairs and Network Standards with CommScope. I came to CommScope, obviously, via Ruckus, which was part of ARIS and then got acquired by CommScope. So we're all part of CommScope as of April of this year. And at CommScope, my responsibilities, again, regulatory and standards, and that really encompasses everything that CommScope does, both wireless and wired. And on the wireless side, we have interests really across the gamut, everything from the unlicensed Wi-Fi portfolio to the CBRS on-go products that we come to market with. And then CommScope has a large portfolio of licensed cellular band products as well. So, our interests, again, are licensed, unlicensed, and these new dynamic shared spectrum allocation methods as well. So in addition to my role with CommScope, I am also the president of the CBRS Alliance. That is an organization of now 147 member companies and organizations that have come together to pursue the cellular opportunities in the CBRS band. So that really is LTE and emerging 5G new radio opportunities in the CBRS band, and helped get that organization off the ground, really starting about 4 years ago. Was the first secretary for the Alliance, and then I've been the president for about the last year and a half. So glad to be with y'all. Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining. It's an honor to have you here, and congratulations again on the gig of the president. Sounds really good, and a pretty good timing to be in that space. So should we quickly touch base on CBRS in short? If people, for those that don't know, it's just a 1-minute intro, and I'm sure you've done this a trillion times. So anything else we should know besides 3.5 gigahertz, 150 megahertz, and then there's this funky 3-layer priority approach to it, and on the lowest level. Also, the common public, I guess, can, or pretty much any enterprise, for example, can utilize that without a fee, right? So a quick intro to CBRS.
Sure, and hopefully most people are relatively familiar at this point. I feel like, I do this pitch a lot, but there's some good resources out there. I mean, if you actually go to the Alliance's website, cbrsalliance.org, and then you go under resources, there's some good primers there. I think I saw Keith Parsons posted one even earlier today, and today's the 17th, by the way. So Keith posted a link to a primer online as well. But as you said, Jussi, I mean, it's 150 megahertz of prime midband spectrum, and it's 3550 to 3700 megahertz, which, if you look globally at spectrum that's being allocated for next generation quote unquote cellular services, in the midband, the focus is on the 3.4 to 3.8, arguably up to 4.2, but certainly 3.4 to 3.8 are really the hot midband ranges for next generation services. if you look at Korea, they've launched 5G in 3.4 to 3.6. A lot of European countries are making allocations in those ranges, again, for 5G services. So, CBRS sits nicely in terms of how it lines up with that global activity. As you said, what really makes CBRS, innovative, novel, and I think revolutionary, quite honestly, and I don't think it's hyperbole to say that we could be sitting down 20 years from now and having a little recap on, okay, how did that CBRS thing work out? I don't think it's necessarily an overstatement to think that 20 years from now we'll be looking back on this moment as analogous to when the 2.4 ISM bands were opened up for unlicensed use, because I think it could have that same type of dramatic impact on industry just by enabling up the ecosystem and innovation. And that's really because of, excuse me, as you pointed out, the 3-tier sharing framework. I apologize. I've had a little cold here, but the key point for everybody to understand is that the whole premise around CBRS is that we are opening up a spectrum band where there are federal, U.S. federal incumbent operations, and they actually are Department of Defense or military operations. And this came about because, going back to the 2010-2011 timeframe, the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, aka PCAST, came out with a report that said, there's no way we're going to meet the demands for commercial demands for spectrum in this country, especially spectrum below 10 gigahertz, if we don't figure out how to make use of some of these bands which are currently allocated to the federal government and its agencies. And they said what we really need to look at is bands where the federal use is light. And light could mean, it's not being used in many areas geographically. It could mean that of the overall, frequency range, only very narrow bandwidths are being used at a time. Or it could mean over the time domain. So, it's only being used X number of minutes a week or X number of days a month. So in any of those cases where the usage is light, can we figure out how to share that with commercial services? And so that led to the president mandating to the National Telecommunications Information Administration, which oversees federal spectrum in the U.S., he told them to go off and do a study to come back with any recommendation on which bands we could try to do the sharing with. They came back and said 3550 to 3650, the lower 100 megahertz of the CBRS band, or what's now the CBRS band, was a great candidate, and that was because it's primarily used for ship-based radar systems. Those ship-based radar systems are very narrow band. They're ship-based, so they tend to be off the coasts. And when they're active, they aren't active, constantly. They're typically used, a few days a month, sort of a thing, when they're operating. So that, all those characteristics seem to make it a good candidate. That led to the FCC then taking it up, published a NPRM in the 2012 timeframe, and that has led to today, where we've got commercial services authorized as of Monday of this week, or yesterday, actually. And the way the 3-tier sharing works is we've got to protect those incumbents, the federal incumbents, and there are also a few commercial incumbents in the band, both some satellite earth stations, this is downlink earth stations, as well as some fixed wireless services in the upper 50 megahertz, the 3650 to 3700. And those fixed wireless services are kind of considered grandfathered protected incumbents for a period of time. And then the expectation is they will convert to the new CBRS mode of operation. But for, as we get started, they are protected incumbents. And so that's tier 1 is the protected incumbents, and the higher tiers have priority and preemptibility over the lower tiers. So we have tier 1 incumbent services. And then we're introducing 2 new classes of commercial service. At tier 2, you've got what's called the priority access licenses, or PALs, they're commonly referred to. And this is more analogous to what we know with licensed spectrum. So this will be protected and exclusive rights to 10 megahertz of the band for a geographic area. And the way that they're going to license the PALs is at the county level. So in the U.S., there's about 3,000 counties. And I mentioned there's going to be licensed in 10 megahertz chunks, and they're going to license up to 7 PALs in each county. So essentially, you can allocate as much as 70 megahertz of the band for protected exclusive use, and that those PALs will be allocated in the lower 100 megahertz, so between 3550 and 3650. Those will be sold at auction. The Chairman Pai actually just recently previewed the September 26th FCC open meeting, and he mentioned they're going to actually be looking at the PAL auction procedures or proposed procedures, voting on that, and then hopefully establishing a June 2020 auction date for the PALs. And a few things that are important to note there. All of the radios that are going to operate in CBRS at Tier 2 and Tier 3, they have to be frequency agile. So they have to be able to tune anywhere between 3550 and 3700, and then they have to get their essentially get their operating frequency assignment from what's called a spectrum access system. And the spectrum access system is a geolocation database, cloud hosted. That's aware of the overall RF environment, aware of the incumbent usages, and then can make spectrum grants to CBRS commercial users, based on their location and based on whether they're operating at Tier 2 or Tier 3. So a few other things about PAL before I move on. There'll be 7 that can be allocated in a county. One entity can only possess or can only win at auction as many as 4. So there's no opportunity for any one entity to sort of monopolize the whole PAL tier nationwide or anything. So you can only have 4 or 40 megahertz if you as a single user or single entity, I should say. Those are probably the big things. They're going to be county level. They're going to be for a 10-year term. And then moving on to Tier 3, bottom line, it's 150 megahertz total in the band, and anything that's not being used by a Tier 1 incumbent and is not being used by a Tier 2 PAL is available for Tier 3. And Tier 3 is known as General Authorized Access, or GAA. And it's as simple as that. People, make the comparison to unlicensed, and that's fair, but it sort of fails at a certain point, that analogy, simply because with unlicensed Part 15, there's no coordination requirement. You just have to go out and operate on and not willingly create or willfully, I should say, create interference. But there's no coordination requirement at all. In CBRS, which is known as Part 96 in the federal code, in Part 96, you have to agree whether you're operating at the PAL tier or at the GAA tier. You have to agree to operate under the coordination of one of the spectrum access systems, which I mentioned earlier. So I think that's where it's a bit different. But so depending on where you are in the country, in some cases there'll be some incumbent activity, and then there'll probably be good demand for the PALs, and I think this would be more in the metropolitan, urban, suburban areas. I think we will see good uptake on the PAL licenses there. So you may have about 80 megahertz COLA to work with at the GAA tier. But then, if you get out into more rural areas, then I think, it's highly likely that you'll have, close to the full 150 megahertz of the band to work with at GAA. And, I think one of the other things that's important to understand is, these SASs, we can factor in things like building entry losses, propagation, different propagation modeling, clutter. So the hope is that, as we get more real-world experience with the system, we'll be able to make, more aggressive and I think more realistic assumptions about, spectrum availability and spectrum reuse. So, my hope would be we'll get to the point where in an urban or suburban environment, even if somebody's using the PAL, outdoor for a more of an operator-based, public network, that you'd be able to utilize that same spectrum, co-channel to the PAL indoor, due to building entry, due to clutter, and do that because and the other thing is it's a low power band, right? So the radios are really classified into two classifications. There's category A radios, which are actually the low power ones, and this is probably closer to what we're used to from the Wi-Fi world. So it's 30 dBm radiated or 1 watt, and then there's category B, and category B is up to 47 dBm, so up to 50 watts, and those are outdoor. So kind of pico cells, mid power, if you will. Certainly nothing like macro towers, but still enough to cover a few kilometers if you'd like to. The category B radios, the higher power ones, or mid power ones, I should say, those do have to be professionally installed. And then the category A radios, they either have to be able to self-locate themselves to a relatively stringent level of precision. So they have to be able to self-locate within plus or minus 50 meters in the horizontal plane and plus or minus 3 meters vertically. And they can either determine that, again, electronically or autonomously, or they need to be professionally installed, and then the installer verifies the location attributes and enters that into the system. And I remember talking about CBRS at one of the WLPC events. Had to be 2 years ago, I think, because I'm always ahead of my time. But I was, pointing out to the, wireless LAN professionals in the group that, one of the opportunities, with CBRS would be, for these professional installation services. And indeed, I think that's the case. I mentioned Keith earlier. I'll just mention, he had a few posts on Twitter this morning about companies that are offering the certified professional installer training. And I think there are 5 different companies who are doing that now. CommScope has a CPI training curriculum. Google has one. Federated Wireless has one. Nokia has one. And then there's a 5th one, which I'm forgetting at the moment. Yeah, I could go on for a while, but I'll probably stop there. I think that's probably CBRS 101.
Thank you so much. That's a great primer, and like you said, there's also additional resources available easily by Googling. So can we talk about CBRS situation today? So initial commercial deployments are just kicking off, and you guys are kind of celebrating that as well. On coming Friday. So what's the situation in terms of 2 things? The initial commercial deployments, what does that mean? And what kind of infrastructure is there available today? And can I actually install it and start using GAA priority already or tier 3 systems today? Or how does it work?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So let's see. Yes, so we got a public notice from the FCC yesterday. So this was September the 16th that authorized 5 of these spectrum access system providers, the first 5, if you will. So again, it was CommScope, Google, Federated Wireless, Amdocs, and Sony were the 5 SaaS administrators who were authorized to begin initial commercial operations in the band. So that just happened yesterday, and it's really the culmination of, sort of 6 years of effort. So there's been a lot of milestones, but this is probably the biggest milestone we've had.
Congratulations, Dave.
Huge. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we got like you said, we got this big launch event party going on tomorrow in DC. Folks from the FCC and TIA and DoD, and then industry all coming together to, just celebrate. So we're excited about that. But yeah, what does that mean to your listeners? Well, if you haven't been following this closely or haven't really thought about what you could do with CBRS, what it really means is that, you can reach out to one of the equipment providers or one of the SaaS admins, and start having conversations about what you could do in the band for really probably initially private services. If you're an enterprise, I would think most of the operators, frankly, are pretty neck deep in this and have had their plans in place for a long time. But from an enterprise or an industrial user's perspective, you can contact again an OEM or SaaS admin and talk about your needs. And there's equipment available. To your question about infrastructure, I will put a plug in for CommScope Ruckus. We were the first company to get an infrastructure device authorized for the band. That was actually last September, so about a year ago. We got our FCC Part 96 authorization for the Q710 and Q910 small cell products. So we were really pleased about that. There's certainly other equipment that's been authorized since then. And not only is it FCC Part 96 authorized, it's now actually been OnGo certified by the CBRS Alliance, and OnGo is the brand mark that we're promoting, analogous to the Wi-Fi brand mark for 802.11 technologies. We've got OnGo for CBRS-based LTE and 5G technologies. There's infrastructure out there. Again, our Q710s, Q910s, I'll just use those as an example since I'm pretty familiar with them, since my company makes them. It's quite analogous in terms of the deployment model to, Wi-Fi PoE based. We use our Ruckus Cloud as the management platform. There is, again, the professional installer requirement to determine the location, but they deploy much the same way that you would deploy a Wi-Fi AP.
So
on the client side,
the 710. Sorry to interrupt. The 710 is an indoor AP, and that's certainly low power, right? Well, what about the outdoor? Is that capable for both the high category A as well as category B high power, or that's just low power?
The 910 is also category A. So both of our 710, our 910, and the 410, which is actually a snap-in module, which goes into our Wi-Fi access points. All of them are category A products. The 710 and the 910 are both 1 watt EIRP. And that's, we're largely looking to leverage, obviously, our expertise with Wi-Fi and our installed base. And so, that's, for the outdoor product, it's really kind of geared more to people who would be deploying 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi for campus coverage or stadiums and things like this. So that's sort of what the 910 is focused on. Category B, which is again up to 50 watts, there's certainly solutions from a number of vendors, and we're certainly constantly looking at the market demand, and I wouldn't rule out us coming to market with a category B.
Right, and for category A products, you mentioned the installers. Of course, you guys, Ruckus having shipped Wi-Fi for 10 plus years, you guys know those guys. So do you see, like, across the board, not just Ruckus, but some of the other players too, it's going to be the same companies, same guys in the future installing CBRS APs as, we're installing just Wi-Fi before? We've already seen this, like Wi-Fi guys have started to install different kinds of system, let's say BLE for location tracking or whatever it may be. So who used to be like kind of like more like focused Wi-Fi guys now seem to be, on their way to be forced and to be privileged to learn new technologies, including CBRS. Or will this be a totally different group of people installing, or is it like hybrid? How does it work?
Yeah, great question. To my mind, it's really going to be more the latter. It's going to be a combination of, I think some of the, professionals and the systems integrators who, have been doing Wi-Fi systems, probably the higher end of that market, if you will. So folks who do, professional installation of Wi-Fi for enterprises, hospitality, certainly if you get into healthcare, higher ed, manufacturing, the ones who, I think, really take, well, on some of the more challenging environments and more dense environments with Wi-Fi, we've seen a good amount of interest from a number of our partners in just expanding their portfolio and taking on this new opportunity with CBRS. And so, we've been doing a number of training sessions with people, and certainly working with our partners, channel partners, and then installation partners on this opportunity. And I think we're feeling good about where we are as the technology comes to the market and to commercial deployment. That said, I think that there are also other industries who are going to be interested in that opportunity. So you have companies that have been doing in-building cellular systems, typically DAS or distributed antenna systems, for many years, and I think they see CBRS as a way to kind of broaden their market. The DASs are great, and they can be very effective, but the economics and the ROIs of DASs tend to make them most attractive in very large public venues where you have a real high traffic of sort of public high public traffic coming through the venue, is where DASs tended to have the most bang for the buck. And so those companies, I think they're seeing CBRS as a way to expand their market to the, I forget the numbers, but it's something, it's some phenomenal number of commercial properties in the United States that are between about 50,000 and 200,000 square foot. And DAS, kind of the economics of DAS are troublesome in that kind of a property. So, CBRS to those companies can represent the opportunity to get make that market so much bigger. So I think you'll see some of them getting into it as well. I think it's a fascinating opportunity. I think the operators, and when I say operators, I mean really the mobile operators and the cable operators, also are going to be looking, to use CBRS as a way to get better in-building penetration of LTE and then 5G signals going forward. Spread that CapEx. If an enterprise can roll out the radios, but then the operator can then, leverage that for their own subscribers when they're within the building. That's attractive to the operators, and so I won't be surprised to see the operators also expanding their managed service portfolios around CBRS, and that obviously has the installation aspect to it as well.
Okay, very good. And client devices. Now we finally get to the beef of now. Huge win for you guys, the iPhone supporting now CBRS and band 48. That essentially means it just supports all of the CBRS frequencies, right? And so does Pixel 3, I think, and the Galaxy S10. Yeah. So the high-end devices now support that. Any other devices like, let's say, connecting laptops or iPads, right, or things like that? How does the whole situation work?
Right. So, we were obviously very pleased to see the launch event last, I guess it was a week ago today. The band 48 support in the iPhone 11 and the 11 Pro. So that was great. To my mind, that's sort of just further validation. Obviously, it's important when Apple makes a move to support something, kind of validates the market. But as you said, it's important to note that, client devices for CBRS and Part 96 and band 48. So let me just clarify that real quick. So I mentioned earlier, Part 96 is the FCC authorization you need to get to be operational to operate in CBRS. And then band 48 is the 3GPP band definition for LTE operation in the CBRS band. So you'll hear people throw around Part 96, band 48. It all basically means CBRS capable. And you'll hear OnGo certified as well. Also means CBRS capable. The iPhone, again, is important, good validation. But, to your point, we started to see, client devices received their FCC Part 96 authorizations as far back as last November. First was a module, embedded module from Sierra Wireless, and that's in a lot of different products and form factors, which I'll talk about. But the first smartphone form factor was actually the Google Pixel 3, which you mentioned. So, we saw the Google Pixel 3. I think that was in January, if I remember correctly. Soon thereafter, Samsung came out with Band 48 Part 96 in the Galaxy S10, the Note 10. LG has it in their latest Think smartphone. OneCell has it in their newest platform as well. There's a Motorola. Motorola has both a push-to-talk handset, which isn't really a smartphone, but they have push-to-talk SLN 1000, and then they also have in one of their newest smartphone form factors as well. So there's really a range of smartphones now. As you said, it's mostly the higher end of the market, although I think you could argue that like the baseline iPhone 11 isn't really, I don't know, it's what, $700, I think $699 list. So I don't know, I don't even know if that's mid-tier or high-end anymore. Seems like some phones are breaking 1,200. So, yeah, but
laptops.
Sorry.
Can I connect laptops
to
CBRS?
Yeah, great. That was where I was going to go. So, the smartphone use case is important. I mean, it's certainly important to the mobile operators and the cable operators that we get, those phones out into the device population, and they can start utilizing CBRS for, mobile broadband services. But, the use cases for CBRS go well beyond just sort of public operator mobile broadband. So you're asking about sort of the laptop form factor, and yes, there are a range of, today there are a range of both USB dongle implementations as well as embedded modules you can get from laptop manufacturers that support CBRS Band 48. So you'll start seeing more laptops come to market. And again, these will probably be more the high-end laptops that will have a CBRS LTE capability embedded in them, or you can go out and get a USB module that adds it. That way, there's a number of gateway devices that will bridge Ethernet or serial to CBRS as well. And these can be used for regular enterprise applications or for more industrial. So when I talk about private cellular use cases, to me that means two things. It means sort of enterprise, which and I think enterprise is a horrible term because really within enterprise you have everything from hospitality to education to healthcare to large public venues to traditional carpeted office space. But call all of that broadly enterprise. You've got that category, and then you've got industrial, and industrial is a very interesting opportunity for CBRS, and there's a number of modules coming. There's a number of modules available today actually for industrial manufacturers and other types of industries such as transportation, rail yards, ports, etc., to CBRS enable equipment, security cameras, things like this, and that really I think is going to be a big market for CBRS. If you look at the people who participated in the FCC proceedings, it's included names like Port of Los Angeles, Union Pacific Railroad, General Electric, FedEx, and I'm sure I'm forgetting a number of other ones, but some big players in the again, logistics, transportation, and manufacturing and power generation as well are all quite keen on using CBRS, and there are client devices available today for that. And then finally, so you kind of got the mobile broadband, which I put under sort of the mobile operator, cable operator use cases. You've got private, both enterprise and industrial, and then the other sort of major use case that I would categorize is fixed wireless. So I'd mentioned that there's grandfather fixed wireless providers in the band today as incumbents up in the upper 50 megahertz. And they certainly want to leverage the whole 150 megahertz, as well as to sort of capture the economic benefits and lower costs you get with a mass market technology like LG like you get with LTE, and you will get in the future with 5G, because a lot of the solutions that they have available today, or have had in the past, I should say, were more proprietary versus standardized. So a lot of the wireless internet service providers, or WISPs, are very eager to use CBRS to deliver, fixed broadband to their residential and small business customers, especially in rural areas. And there is a range of customer premises equipment available, CPE, that supports CBRS now. We've had some of our members, that is the CBRS Alliance member companies, talk at events about how they've been able to deliver, 100 megabit broadband services to folks out to 8 miles using CBRS. And of course, that depends on line of sight and everything else. But it holds a tremendous amount of promise for the fixed wireless use case. And it's not just the kind of smaller WISPs who are planning on offering fixed wireless. Actually, AT&T and Charter have both talked about using CBRS to extend the range of their existing wired broadband networks. Either fiber or hybrid fiber coax, but using CBRS to just extend the range and the reach so that they can bring in, more homes and help, again, meet the demand for connectivity in especially in the rural markets where fiber and coax don't make economic sense.
Okay, cool. So one thing that comes to mind, I guess, is when would someone consider installing CBRS in addition to or instead of Wi-Fi? And what are the, on the technology side? I'm sure there's, like you said, interference probably better in control. Voice might work better in CBRS, that kind of stuff. So when and why would someone consider CBRS instead or in addition to Wi-Fi? And then there's the power. Of course, you can get more power out of this and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And, I'm often asked, what is the relationship between CBRS and Wi-Fi? And, I'll just start off saying, unequivocally, in my perspective, this is not about, CBRS supplanting Wi-Fi, or cellular technologies, right? I mean, so traditional cellular technologies, we're not really, it's a new capability. I think it's going to complement the existing solutions well. I think that, to my mind, an enterprise looking at CBRS, could be that they're just at a point where 5 gigahertz is getting crowded, and there's only so many 40 megahertz channels you can do in 5 gigahertz today, and CBRS represents 150 megahertz of very predictable spectrum that you can utilize. So if you are spectrum constrained, or you're feeling that way, or you've got a truly mission critical application where latency, packet loss, jitter really are impediments to your business, then I think CBRS can really be a good complement to the enterprise Wi-Fi. It can help to alleviate some of the traffic on the Wi-Fi network as well. But to my mind, Wi-Fi is always going to be the default in-building wireless service for large data transfers, general purpose data usage. So I think CBRS can complement that as a predictable, very reliable spectrum for again, mission critical. I think the one area where I will say I think there's an opportunity for CBRS to have some clear advantages over 802.11 based solutions is kind of going back to that industrial conversation, and it doesn't apply to all I'm not saying every warehouse or every manufacturing facility is going to replace their Wi-Fi network with CBRS. That's not going to happen. But there are a few cases where and it's not Wi-Fi's issue. It's more just the vagaries of unlicensed spectrum. Do present challenges. So one of my favorite examples is a port, and it's actually in Europe. So, but they converted from an 802.11 based solution to a private LTE solution, and the reason they did this was because they were using 802.11 based technologies and unlicensed spectrum for controlling the cranes, the automated loaders, essentially all of the operations at the dock. And this is one of the biggest port facilities in Europe. And it got to the point where Wi-Fi is so popular and so successful that every container ship that pulls up alongside the dock now has 3 or 4 Wi-Fi access points operating on it, right? And of course, there's no way to coordinate the channel plan for the ship with the channel plan of the dock. And if I get 2 or 3 of these ships imported at a time, all of a sudden I've got issues with the channel operation and interference, and it was becoming quite an issue for this port. And the figures are staggering. Every hour that one of these cranes or loaders is offline is tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of euros in lost revenue. So yeah, the economics were pretty straightforward for them to convert this to a private LTE based solution, and they're very content with that. Very, very pleased that they made that decision. There's another chemical manufacturing facility where this was more of a range issue, where they just were not getting the coverage that they needed from 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi based solutions, and they wanted to convert to an LTE based approach. They talked to one of the mobile operators about it, and the costs were quite high. It was tens of dollars per gigabyte, and they were generating something in the order of 100,000 gigabytes of video traffic every month from various security cameras and monitoring cameras around their facility. So the economics of doing it as a managed service from an MNO were just totally untenable, and so they've deployed private LTE solution, and they've got They manage all that traffic. It's locally, it's kept on-prem. They don't have to send it up to an MNO's core and then bring it back down. And again, I think those are some of the kind of opportunities where there are some distinctive advantages of the combination of the CBRS spectrum plus an LTE or a 5G waveform. But but they tend to be pretty limited. What percentage of the Wi-Fi market is sort of sort of precision industrial manufacturing and logistics? I mean, I'm thinking it's probably not even 8% of the market. So.
Okay, that's cool. Jerry, you had a question, right?
I do, and I fear this is going to be a dumb question, but this has definitely been very insightful, and I'm trying to wrap my head around all of this, and especially coming from a cellular background and specifically coming at it from the Wi-Fi side. One of the things that I'm struggling with is, okay, we've got CBRS, we've got the CBRS Alliance, we've got Band 48, all these different kind of new terminologies. And I'm trying to relate that to the Wi-Fi side of things. And typically those kind of fall into 3 buckets. On the Wi-Fi side is we have the IEEE, that writes the 802.11 standard. And then we have the Wi-Fi Alliance that does the certifying and the branding side on that. And then we have the band that Wi-Fi operates in. Typically, we refer to that as the ISM band. Can you help me to maybe kind of navigate that and see if I'm understanding all this correctly, of specifically the CBRS piece of it? Is it a technology? Is it a band? Is it both? And then obviously the CBRS Alliance piece, where does that fit into in translation to what we know on the Wi-Fi side?
No, good question. Thanks, and I'm glad you brought it up, because I would have been remiss if I didn't talk about particularly about the Wireless Innovation Forum. aka WinForum. And so, as you just said, Jerry, in the in sort of the Wi-Fi paradigm, we're all familiar with IEEE makes the they develop the standards, and Wi-Fi Alliance takes those and implements the certification. And we just saw the launch of Wi-Fi 6 certification yesterday, so that was great. So, the analogs on the, I'm going to say OnGo side, and there's another term for you, right, to kind of also, OnGo is the certification program that the CBRS Alliance has launched. But the analogs on our side would be WinForum to IEEE. So WinForum, or Wireless Innovation Forum, again, is the organization that has taken the FCC's rules and has really worked, not just within industry, but has also worked very closely with government to include the FCC, NTIA, and the DoD on, creating the functional requirements and then the actual, standards, so, protocol standards, security standards, SaaS operational standards, everything. That has happened at the WinForum level. The thing that's interesting about that, and I guess I think the analogy holds true even to IEEE, WinForum is somewhat agnostic, and IEEE writ large, not 802.11 necessarily, but 802, is also sort of technology agnostic, right? So the FCC doesn't say you will do, LTE in the band, or you will do Wi-Fi in the band, or you will do 5G in the band. They basically say, here's a band, and, industry figure out, what you want to do with it based on these rules. So all of the WinForum work is sort of technology agnostic again. So it's the foundational specifications that enable different radio technologies to operate in the CBRS band. That's what WinForum has done. And WinForum has been doing its work in the band on the band, I should say, for about 6 years. At least. The CBRS Alliance came together just over 3 years ago. We publicly launched the Alliance with 6 founding members in August of 16. We're 147 members today. And we came together to very parochially look at LTE and now 5G operation in the band. We said, there's some differences about doing LTE in a shared spectrum band than doing it in an exclusive licensed band, which is how LTE, aside from LAA, has always operated. So, the Alliance undertook to take, the existing body of work from 3GPP and basically make any extensions or adaptations to optimize LTE and 5G for the CBRS band. And then we created a certification program for those solutions that, again, we brand marked with as OnGo. And so we now have OnGo certified infrastructure equipment. It's highly likely you'll see the OnGo certification extended to things like the SaaS and some of the other software components of the solution, as well as the clients. We don't OnGo certify clients today, but I think as some of the more advanced capabilities are developed and then come into the market, it's likely you'll see OnGo certification extended to the client. So, the analog there obviously is the Wi-Fi Alliance with the certification efforts that they do. And then the Band 48 piece that you asked about, that's just, 3GPP is the global organization that does, cellular standards. However, they really undertake efforts or activity that are global in nature, and they haven't done any development that's been specific to CBRS in terms of core LTE or 5G technology standards. I would say they haven't had dedicated work streams around that. They have come out with band specifications, which is critically important. So we have a Band 48 specification, which dictates, for a, end user device in particular, you will operate, you will be able to tune anywhere between 3550 to 3700, and you will operate at this power level and with this type of a mask, everything to make it compliant with the FCC's, Part 96 rules. So there's band 48 for LTE, and there's now N48 for 5G NR operation in CBRS. And so 3GPP has done those things. There's a little bit of work going on in 3GPP within around what's called 5G NRSS, which is 5G in shared spectrum. Some of that will certainly be applicable to what we're doing in CBRS, but the Alliance is also developing some of our own specifications around 5G operation in the band. So, I would say 3GPP is not directly involved. I'm not sure if I'm overstating that, but I would say the contrast is really more, the comparison is really more, IEEE maps to Wind Forum and Wi-Fi Alliance maps to the CBRS Alliance.
Perfect. Yeah, that clears up a lot for me. Thank you.
So yeah, thank you so much for covering in detail pretty much all the relevant things us Wi-Fi folks should understand on CBRS. Should we quickly just touch base? I know this is not your cup of tea, but it's more your cup of tea probably than mine or maybe Jerry's. What about the whole LAA? Was it band 46? So what was announced essentially is LAA or the new iPhone, for example, works for LAA or license assisted access on the whole 5 gigahertz, you could say Wi-Fi range or UNII range. So what do you think that's the impact? Like, should we be concerned, more and more concerned as Wi-Fi people, that this means that operators will be pushing more and more traffic to the Wi-Fi frequencies, or should we be relieved that it's LAA and not something less polite of a standard that backs off less easily than LAA? What do you think of the whole LAA thing?
Right. Yeah, it's been a few years since I've been focusing on LAA. But I think to your last question, I think LAA is certainly a better outcome for the Wi-Fi industry, in my opinion, than the alternatives. Right. So I don't want to relitigate or dredge up old wounds or everything, but if we wound the clock back 4 years, there was the whole battles about LTEU and Wi-Fi, and LTEU was the non-listen before talk based approach, which just essentially tried to sense the media and then made some what seemed like relatively arbitrary decisions about how much of the overall duty cycle it would utilize for LTE traffic in the 5 gigahertz bands. So I think LAA with LBT, is a better outcome. I think the Wi-Fi industry, made its case and was able to convince, regulators that is the way the technologies should coexist in, the unlicensed bands. I think that, one thing that everybody should be thinking about is, there's a whole effort underway to open up the 6 gigahertz bands for unlicensed operation, both in the U.S. and in Europe in particular. And it's likely that we're going to be talking again about, how do we make sure that 802.11 based Wi-Fi technologies are coexisting, optimally with cellular unlicensed technologies. And so, we're familiar with LAA, which is the LTE using unlicensed spectrum as essentially as a capacity augmentation to the licensed bands, where you carrier aggregate band 46 5 gigahertz with an exclusively licensed band. And traditionally, that's been for what's called supplemental downlink, so you can increase the capacity on the downlink to the client. But that's all in the LTE domain. There's a work underway now in the in 3GPP to utilize unlicensed for 5G services as well. And those could be, again, sort of the carrier aggregation with the license band. So, if you will, 5G LAA, But there's another variant called 5G NRU, or New Radio Unlicensed. And this is, a standalone version of 5G that would operate exclusively in unlicensed spectrum. So, for those of you familiar with multi-fire, this is sort of, 5G multi-fire, but as a 3GPP work product. I mean, one of the things about multi-fire is it wasn't a 3GPP effort. It was undertaken by the Multi-Fire Alliance. So, so my point here is that, 5G new radio, both NRU and I'll call it NRLAA, will be, seeking to make use of unlicensed spectrum, and not just the 5 gigahertz band, but I think also the 6 gigahertz band, as that hopefully is opened up relatively soon for unlicensed. So we're going to need to think carefully about that. How do the 5 gigahertz LBT rules evolve, and largely that's being worked out in the ETSI brand committee. So brand is Broadband Radio Access Networks Group, and ETSI, and because Europe requires listen before talk, it's sort of become the de facto standard setting process where these issues about LBT are being worked through. So it'll be very important to see how those rules for not only 5 gigahertz but 6 gigahertz are sorted out in BRAN. There was a joint workshop between IEEE and 3GPP in Vienna. This was in July, so just a couple months ago, talking about the issues. And this is sort of the latest in a long strings of communications and liaisons that have gone on between IEEE 802.11 and 3GPP. And, I think, that continuing dialogue is good. I think, many people feel there's room for improvement in those conversations. But, it's not something we should, anybody should take their eye off of, because I think it's just the reality going forward. The nice thing about unlicensed is it's an innovation sandbox, it's carrying, tons of Wi-Fi traffic, it's carrying tons of IoT traffic, and it looks like, there's a desire for it to carry more cellular traffic going forward as well. Let's see. I was going to ask you all. So, you asked me about, what I think the impact of the iPhone 46 LAA is, and I haven't heard a lot of complaints about, impacts of LAA, in the wild, quote unquote, or in the real world. To my mind, it's mostly been deployed by the mobile operators in, the metro markets where they're really looking for capacity, but that tends to imply outdoor deployments. So I haven't heard, examples of people finding that, LAA activity is really impacting their enterprise or, public venue Wi-Fi systems. I don't know. Are you guys hearing situations where LAA has either created interference issues or probably more likely just created bandwidth or spectrum contention issues?
I have not heard of LAA creating, interference. What about you, Jerry?
Yeah, no, I haven't. I know that was always a fear, or that was discussed, as this technology was becoming more real. But yeah, I have not seen or heard of any real world impacts to that. Not that it doesn't exist, but it may be pretty niche.
So
yeah, I always thought there was going to be a hard sell for somebody promoting LAA to go into an enterprise or a public venue and say, oh, by the way, we'd like to use some of your 5 gigahertz spectrum, for our to make our cellular service better. But you may lose a channel or two. I don't know how you sell that one to the CIO there.
That's a pretty tough discussion, and actually I've heard of these 5G demo trials and things like that, where the 5 gigahertz space has been used to demonstrate 5G and its impact in large public venues, conference centers, and stuff like that. And the Wi-Fi guys, they're quote unquote fairly upset about the 5G people taking their channels for demoing, but then it depends on who has the most power, I guess, in these negotiations. I know we're already over time, Dave. Last question I'd love to ask you is like, where do you see 2 years, let's fast forward 2 years ahead, where are we with CBRS at that point? And you can, if you want, you can create several scenarios, like your dream scenario versus some pessimistic scenario. But what do you think 2 years from now, where are we with CBRS?
Oh, I mean, I think we'll have a very large installed base of CBRS radios. I think we'll have, in 2 years, I think we'll have a really mature, base of CBRS infrastructure and client equipment. We've got this launch event tomorrow in DC. We're going to have 45 devices on display. I think in 2 years there'll be, hundreds of devices for sure. And I think the clients, will reflect the range of use cases that I talked about earlier. On the smartphone side, I think, we'll have mid-range and low-end handsets, in 2 years, and, a good percentage of the device population with CBRS support. So that'll be very important, not only to the operators, but, to those who want to offer, private LTE services as well. I think we'll be able to look and see, which of the use cases are really, sort of getting, good traction in 2 years. And again, I don't have any doubt. You look at what the mobile operators and the cable operators are planning in terms of their deployments. That one I think is a given. But I think the fixed wireless, and then probably the one that I think has the most potential in the area that's of most interest, probably to the people listening to this podcast, is going to be in the private space. And there, I'm just really excited to see how people are going to be using, CBRS-based solutions for, again, adding capabilities, augmenting their Wi-Fi networks with new capabilities. And then I think, I didn't really talk about it too much, but in the 2-year time frame, I think we could really start to see CBRS in building solutions leveraged as neutral host platforms. So, I think in the near term, let's say 2 years, the enterprise activity is largely going to be private LTE, so internal communications needs that can be met with CBRS solutions. But 2 years from now, I think as those networks are built out, it's only natural that the operators are going to want to leverage that strong in-building cellular coverage that will be available. And so I think you're going to see neutral host embraced as a business model. Roaming hubs and intermediaries will come into existence that will aggregate up, thousands and tens of thousands of in-building footprint, and then offer that to the mobile and the cable operators for better service for their subscribers when they're in building. So that's what kind of gets me excited about 2 or 3 years from now. That's a huge opportunity for CBRS.
Nice. That sounds very promising, and to me, without knowing anything about this, pretty realistic at this point. So Dave Wright, huge congratulations again on what seems like now the wave is really hitting you guys in a positive way. Several things to celebrate for you guys. Was it this Friday? And all the best to the continued success of CBRS. Thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate you, sharing your expertise for our listeners. And if it's okay for you, we will probably, this was such good stuff, like 1 hour in a row. Jerry, what do you think? We could probably just, air this, put this 1 hour discussion out as such available as a podcast, like a special feature or something like that. And then summarize that for like a 2-minute segment also on our show next week. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, this is all really good. Yeah, I agree. I don't think we can whittle this down too much.
What do you think, Dave? Would you be okay with that?
Oh, I'm fine with however you want to use it, Jussi and Jerry. Yeah, that's fine. Sorry, I talk too much, so I'm hard to whittle down.
No, it's great.
This is absolutely fantastic and perfect material for podcast. If someone wants to, understand CBRS in 1 hour, this is the way to go. Anything else, Dave, that you'd like to say to the listeners or to the Wi-Fi community in general?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. My bottom line is I think this really represents another great opportunity for Wi-Fi professionals, wireless LAN professionals. It's not going to take away, business and the opportunities that you've been working on for, the last 10, 20 years. However long you've been working with Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi has a bright and promising future, and I think will always be, or I shouldn't say always, but for the foreseeable future will be the dominant wireless technology on the planet. But CBRS is another great opportunity. The reality is the world is just becoming more and more wireless and more connected at the same time. So we need different bands. We need different ways to tackle problems, and CBRS does that. And it's a great way to expand your knowledge and your skill set and your opportunities. So I hope people will take advantage of that. And thank you again, Jerry and Jussi, for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Jerry, any final questions or comments?
No, I think this has been great. My brain is full. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you all. Yeah, appreciate it.
All right. Hey, safe flight to DC, Dave. Have a toast for me as well, and say hi to our common friends there at your launch event. I hope to see you soon, man.
Likewise. Thank you for arranging this. Appreciate it. Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Cheers.